the real history of the U.S. Let's talk about it. What I'm about to tell you, you're not going to find in any Rockefeller-funded indoctrination camps. This is a very high-level explanation of the United States history. It is not an exhaustive one. All right, the true history of the U.S. In 1606, the Virginia Company of London was chartered by the British King James, and Jamestown was settled and founded in 1607. Then a bunch of stuff happened. Fast forward to 1639, the first postal service started at the Boston Post Office. In 1765, the Stamp Act was passed by the king, forcing the colonies to pay taxes on every piece of paper they used. So, in 1774, the 13 colonies came together and created the Continental Congress because everyone was sick and tired of the tyrannical king's crap and taxes. In 1775, the United States Post Office was created by decree of the Continental Congress for establishing international communications, and the Revolutionary War began to succeed from the crown. But the colonies still owed debts to the king for funding all of the settlements. So, in 1776, the Declaration of Independence was ratified, but true freedom was not obtained. In 1777, the Articles of Confederation for the United States of America was created as an operating agreement between the sovereign states to govern national commerce between each state during war. This was the creation of the United States Corporation. The war continued until 1783, which is when the Treaty of Paris was signed and acknowledged by the king. But the king retained two positions for himself: Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector. The colony's debts that were still owed to the king were assigned to the people of the United States wanting independence, and they promised to pay the debts, which ended the Revolutionary War. In 1788, the Constitution, which is a debt transfer agreement, was ratified. This is where the independence-seeking people of America passed the debts of the colony's settlements on to the inhabitants of the United States. The inhabitants are the ones that still wanted to owe allegiance to the king. The Constitution dissolved the Continental Congress, and in 1789, George Washington became the first president of the U.S. The Judiciary Act also allowed for the first federal courts to be passed. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was incorporated to solidify the rights of the free people to underwrite the creation of the Bank of the United States, allowing for international world trade, and so the U.S. could easily continue to pass money to the King of England. The 11th Amendment was ratified in 1795 to remove the states from using federal courts. In 1801, the District of Columbia was founded as a federal district headquarters for the United States. In 1811, the charter for the Bank of the United States ended, and the states did not want to renew it. This is also when the first 13th Article and Amendment to the Constitution, called the Title of Nobility Act, had 12 of 13 states' approvals that were needed. In 1812, the debt collectors to the king came knocking, and the people couldn't pay, so the War of 1812 broke out. This is where Britain came to shore and seized all of the titles to property and burned all of the courthouses to compel the renewal of the Bank of the United States, and this caused all the states to come together as surety for the debt obligations and interests still owed to the crown. In 1819, the Title of Nobility Act was approved by Virginia, which said no U.S. citizen could be an attorney. But the U.S. federal government didn't acknowledge it. The 1830s through 1850s state territory expansion was very heavy. In 1861, the debts of the states were due, and the Civil War occurred when the states that didn't want to pay the debt obligations that were owed to the crown tried to succeed from paying. And so, in 1862, the IRS was created to solidify a direct fund transfer to the king for debts owed. In 1863, the Lieber Code, also known as General Orders Number 100, was the operating agreement of how the U.S. government's military was going to seize back the Confederate States' assets that were originally promised. In 1865, the surrender of the Confederate States happened at the village of Appomattox Courthouse, but the ultimate treaty of peace was never signed, which was a requirement to end the war. A treaty wasn't signed because this would have given the Confederate States international recognition as an entity, and they didn't want that. The second 13th Article and Amendment was ratified, establishing no involuntary servitude in this year also. In 1868, The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was established, creating subjects and dual citizenship for all U.S. citizens. In 1871, the District of Columbia Organic Act was created in the Virgin Mary, or in the Virginia and Maryland, with a 10 square mile area to secure control and ownership of the state's debts and titles. This government was operating outside of the original Constitution. In 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified to allow for nationwide income tax, and the Federal Reserve Act passed by Congress and was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson, acting as the central bank, which is a privately owned system. Restructuring Congress by the 17th Amendment happened in this year also. In 1917, the Office of the Alien Property Custodian was created to handle enemy money and property. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared the U.S. government corporation bankrupt and updated the Trading with the Enemy Act to include all U.S. citizens as enemies. This is also when the standardized uniform U.S. birth certificates were adopted by all states. In 1934, the Office of the Alien Property Custodian was converted to the Alien Property Bureau in the Treasury to handle all U.S. citizens' money and property because U.S. citizens were classified as enemies. In 1936, the Social Security number started being assigned to all corporate persons. In 1963, the Zone Improvement Plan Code, or zip code, was created to spread a false federal U.S. jurisdiction over the entire continent of the United States of America. In 2001, 9/11 laid the way for the Patriot Act, where all communications became monitored and filtered through the NSA. In 2010, the Obamacare Act was passed, which placed a lien on all U.S. citizens, preventing the creditors of the U.S. from enacting World War III to collect debts. So the people and the public lost their sovereignty, then the states lost their sovereignty, then the U.S. lost their sovereignty, and fast forward, always follow the money. Today, the U.S. is over $32 trillion in debt to the creditors. We are watching firsthand the systematic and categorical collapse of the world's reserve currency.